If you thought we deserted the Big East Conference to win football championships and recruit blue chip players, well, baby, were you wrong? Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This week, I'm going to cut the show in half and pay tribute in the second half to the recent passing of Ray Fosse and focus on a couple of ball players, in addition to Fosse, who had their careers cut short by injuries on the field. But in the first half, as my cartoon was themed, I want to talk about the departure of the Big East teams, or the schools from the Big East Conference, and their records since joining the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, and see whether their moves have actually hurt or helped their football programs. I am going to use basically Boston College for this as I focus on this, because I want to get this in, because sometimes when I'm talking, I usually have some things or topics I want to hit, and I digress and go off and I completely forget. Like, I haven't forgotten the Oil Bowl from last week when I was doing some bowl games that don't exist anymore. And I know that in my concluding, let's say, paragraph on the show, I was saying, well, we visited 4 bowl games and I completely forgot to really go into the Oil Bowl game. But anyway, and I'll get to that in a future program. Anyway, I'd really like to focus on the teams that departed from the Big East and left it really as a basketball conference. And anybody who knows me knows that I like the Boston College. I probably started liking Boston. I've always been a Notre Dame fan. I love the military academies. And I always had a special, let's say, place for Boston College, especially after the wonderful years of the Flutie dynasty that was Boston College. And the reason why I want to bring this up with the Big East is that I know that they left because it was about money, it was about prestige, and it was about the ever expanding influence of, let's say, the traditional conferences, the Big Ten, the Southeast Conference, and the ACC. I get why West Virginia, Boston College, Rutgers, Louisville, trying to think of the other teams offhand, Syracuse and Pitt, why they all left for the ACC, the Big 12, or the Big 10. I get all that. But I actually think, and I would love to talk to some of the graduates of those schools, I'd really like to say, are you really happy that you left the Big East for the ACC or the Big 10? Yeah, they might say from the prestige, the ACC, belonging to the ACC or the Big 10 is a big deal. But I got to be honest with you. If you're sitting on a Saturday afternoon after tailgating in the parking lot, and now you go watch your team play, and you're getting destroyed by some of the conference members in your home park, I can't see how it's fun. And you can say, well, we've been to so many bowls since we've joined the conference. And yes, I'm going to use Boston College as an example. Yes, Boston College has been to 11 bowl games since they joined the ACC. But none of them have been called the Orange or the Sugar Bowl or the Cotton Bowl or even the Rose Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl. All right? Really, those are your 5 big bowl games now. And were they there before? No, not necessarily, although Flutie does get him to the Cotton Bowl back in 84 for the 84-85 season. And BC in their past history, and it wasn't a steeped football history like Notre Dame, but they had been to the Cotton Bowl once before. They had gone to the Orange Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. In fact, I want to talk about their Sugar Bowl of 1940 when they were unbeaten and went into the game 4th, defeated Tennessee, gave the Volunteers their only loss of the year in that Sugar Bowl, and actually finished behind them in the final poll. That's a fact. And I still don't understand how that happened. And it wasn't even like they were decided, let's say, 3-touchdown favorite over the Volunteers. They beat them 19-13. I want to really do some digging and investigating on that. But I don't know how they went from being ahead of them, beat them, stay unbeaten, give the team that they defeated in the bowl game their only loss, and finish behind them in the final polls. It's incredible to me. 1940 was the year that Minnesota was seen as the national champs, and Tom Harmon from the University of Michigan won the Heisman. Even though Michigan was only 7-3, Minnesota was unbeaten and lost to Minnesota in their matchup 7-6. Don't know why that is. Again, I'd love to do some investigating, although you probably have to leave it up to the athletic department and their sports information director as being a great newspaper guy and marketing of all things Tom Harmon that year for the 1940 Michigan Wolverine. Anyway, getting back to BC, I was looking at this. Now look, and I really do believe this, that they stepped up in terms of what they felt was an improvement going from the Big East, which was kind of fighting for a reputation. And remember, the Big East, and it's a team I forgot to talk about, the University of Miami. The Hurricanes had won not one, but 2 championships and lost a third, remember, to Ohio State on kind of a controversial play in that game in the Fiesta Bowl of 2002, I believe. But they were actually in 3 championships, actually 4 championships, because they lost to Alabama in the 92 Sugar Bowl. They were in 4 championships, won 2 of them, had incredible records while they were in the Big East. They were, let's say, the dominant team in the Big East during that formation of it as a football conference. They were pretty much the Alabama. Has anybody talked about Miami since they joined the ACC? In fact, they have been really mediocre. Even this year, they were supposed to start off. They were ranked, and they got their doors blown off by Alabama. They have been a so-so team. No championships, no titles, no big bowl games. BC the same way. Do you realize that BC, and here's the thing with BC. Yeah, they were up and down. But BC was on the verge of really starting to do something, I do believe. Because in 1999, they go 8-4, followed by a 7-5 season, 8-4, 9-4, 8-5. Then 2004, their last year in the Big East, they go 9-3, 4-2 in league play. They actually finished the season in the final polls as the 21st team. They go to the Continental Bowl. They had actually, though, won. Ready for this? And I'm just looking at my monitor over here. They had actually won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, would be winning. They actually won 8 bowl games in a row, and 6 while with the Big East Conference in their last, let's say, 4 or 5 years. So they were building, I do believe, something. All right. So they come into the ACC and they have their first back-to-back double-digit winning seasons. First of all, their first double-digit winning season in 2006, they go 10-3 since the Flutie years. And then they follow that with 11-3 and 9-5. Go down 8-5. 7-6 in 2010. Well, the most wins they've had since 2009, the most wins they've had, 7 wins. And they've done that about 3 or 4 times. Their record in those 7-win seasons, 7-6, 7-6, 7-6. I think you see where I'm coming. They were ascending. They joined the ACC. I believe that the influence of the players that they had recruited while in the Big East and maybe their remarkable records while in the Big East helped maybe their first couple of years in the ACC. But basically, they've bottomed out. And you can say, well, they're 7-6 and they go to a bowl game. But what bowl games are they playing in? It's not the Orange. It's not the Sugar. They are playing in the ones that are basically made up. And they're playing the MAC champion, like a Toledo or an Eastern Michigan. And I am not denigrating those conferences or those programs. But those are programs that are not in the Power 5. Now, they have played in a couple of pinstripe bowl games, and they usually play like it's the ACC versus the Big Ten. Okay, usually pretty good matchups. I do like the pinstripe bowl game because it's usually played in the cold and the mud of Yankee Stadium, the whole 9 yards there. So it's kind of like football from the 60s. But you're talking about Boston College finishing probably 7-5 during the season, with 2 of the wins coming against, let's say, Holy Cross or University of Massachusetts. And by the way, that's how they have 2 wins this year. They played, I'll give you this. Last night, I knew they were going to get destroyed by North Carolina State, and certainly they were, losing 33-7. But here's who Boston College defeated this year to go. They beat Colgate, Massachusetts, Temple, and Missouri. Then they lost to Clemson and North Carolina State. They won their first 4 games, 2 of which Colgate's not even a Division I. They're in the second level, and Massachusetts is an independent. I don't even think they've won a game yet this year. All right, these are teams that, yes, they should be scheduling just as kind of like warm-up games. But when they're getting into their own conference, they can't compete. And now they'll finish 7-6. They will finish 7-6, but then again, they'll wind up playing Toledo in some bowl game. All right? So this is what they've been doing. And taking it a step further, here's the deal. They have defeated, all right, ranked opponents when they were in the Big East. Now, I'm not saying that they were a real David taking on the Goliaths in the top 25 and all the rest of it. And for a program like BC, I guess what would be a pretty good record, maybe for them now, they should be knocking off maybe a top 25 school, maybe 1 out of every 3 times they play them. I'll even give you this, maybe 1 out of 4. All right. But here's what they've done while in the ACC. They have a total of, and I have it listed here. They have Boston College has won 9 of 44 games against ranked opponents since 2005 when they joined the ACC. Now, I'm not saying it's much better when they were in the Big East. In fact, when they were in the Big East, they were 13-40. But obviously, that's a higher winning percentage. And again, what I'm saying is, you know, you're leaving the Big East because you think that you're taking that step up, and that when you join the ACC in a Big 5, a Power 5 conference, that you're going to have, a boatload of talent coming in to be able to compete with the big boys. Well, so far, all indications are they're not. And it is a problem. And I guess I am being envious of the fact that they left the Big East Conference. And I know the Big East Conference went out and got other basketball conference or basketball colleges and universities come into the conference and replace them, like the Xaviers. I get all that, and it happens. But again, 2 things. I don't think these schools should ever have left. I think they were really on. I really think they were on a path of really becoming players and basically making the Big East into a regional power, kind of like the ACC is for basketball, even though they recruit, I know, nationwide. But if you notice that the big Power 5 conferences are all regional powers, and I really believe with television, with the media, with the population, and where those schools were situated. You did have Miami, so you had a player in the Southeast, or actually on the Atlantic coast, all right, that could compete, and they were, against Florida State and Florida. You had that team there. You had a team up in Massachusetts, which encompassed all of, the New England region, plus Syracuse, which had a fine reputation for football. They were just, again, here in Syracuse, they were another team that was really, I thought, always on the precipice of doing something. Do you realize that Syracuse, and I'm using them now, do you realize that Syracuse before they joined the ACC, ready for this? They had won, they had a season where they won 10 games under Pat Clarone. They had 2 seasons in the early 90s where they won back-to-back 10-win seasons, had gone to the Fiesta Bowl, had gone and played in the Gator Bowl, had played in the Fiesta Bowl, had in 1998 played in the Orange Bowl. Since then, probably their biggest deal since joining the ACC, I would actually say it's the Pinstripe Bowl, where they've appeared twice. So they're another school. They would have had all of New York State, upper New York State. And listen, you had the great Jimmy Brown. You had Ernie Davis. You had Floyd Little. These are great players, Hall of Fame players. In college, 2 of them were Hall of Fame players. The only reason Davis wasn't was that he passed away. But Floyd Little and Jimmy Brown, Hall of Fame players in the NFL. So they had some history of doing well. Now listen, are they doing it repetitively like Oklahoma and Texas and Alabama? No. But I really believe this. Had they just stayed within the conference, they really would have built perhaps a regional power conference. And I can say this only because what have they done since they left? Here's Pitt, which with Tony Dorsett had won the national title in 1976. With Dan Marino, yes, these are all independent seasons, but they actually joined the Big East. All right. When they joined the Big East, they finished. Actually, they weren't doing so badly. They came in okay, left okay. They've actually been successful outside the Big East, better than the other schools. They were 138 and 145 in the Big East. They've gone to the ACC. Yes, they are 11 games over 500 so far. Pat Narduzzi in the last couple of years seems to maybe have straightened the team out. But even Pitt, guys, has not played in a big-time bowl game, which everyone thought was going to occur when they joined the ACC. Nothing. In fact, here's what they've done. Probably their best game, they played in 2 Sun Bowls while in the ACC. No, not even. They've only played in 1 Sun Bowl while in the ACC, and that was 2018, and they finished 7-7 and lost in the Sun Bowl that year. Okay, that was under Pat Narduzzi, who has gone 5-7, 7-7, 8-5, 6-5, and this year right now he's 5-1. And there's some people who think that he might even be able to finally break through and challenge for the ACC title. And not only that, but maybe even be a player. This is what I read on ESPN's with all of the probabilities and all the rest of it. They may even have a shot at maybe being a Final 6 or a Final 4. All right. Cincinnati, another school. Yeah, they've had unbelievable success under Luke Fickell the last couple of years. Fickell under the last 2 years. They did lose to Georgia in the Peach Bowl last year. They never got a whiff of, let's say, the Peach Bowl or the Sun Bowl while in the Big East, but they were starting to develop there. In fact, they had Brian Kelly before Kelly goes and takes the Notre Dame job. While in the Big East, they were 9-12 against ranked teams. While in the AAC, they're 4-12. Now, they had a huge win against Notre Dame a couple of weeks ago. They have to keep winning, and potentially they are ranked number 3 right now in the top 20, could play as one of the Final 4 teams in the playoffs. But, and who knows if it's a one-and-done type of thing. Will they ever be back at this precipice again while in the AAC? However, I really do believe this. Cincinnati may be in the Big East with Virginia Tech and West Virginia. It would have been, again, like a regional type of thing. And I really thought that's what the Big East had really done. They plucked certain schools for the football, but they were regional, but they were also powers. For instance, Miami could go against Florida State and Florida. You had Cincinnati. Yeah, maybe they would struggle with Ohio State, obviously, in terms of recruiting and stuff, but they might be able to get Southern Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. And certainly every year they could compete against Indiana and Illinois, let's face it, and even Purdue, if they had stayed in the Big East. The Big East had television, they had the population, and there was definitely, I always believe this, there is definitely a love of college football that's just waiting just for the right team here in the Northeast to come to the front and just say, boom, we're going to be the player. All right. Penn State, yeah, for many years they were like that. They leave and go to the Big Ten, but where have they been? They won 2 national titles as independents. They joined the Big Ten, and yes, they've had some great seasons, but they've been really up and down as well. Okay. I'm leaving them out only because they were never part of the Big East package. But West Virginia, another program I never realized. Well, I'm going to get this. Let's talk about Miami, because they were the only one of the group that had won national titles in the last 40 years. Miami, while they were in the Big East, was 35-23 against ranked opponents. All right. Plus, they had 2 national titles. Since joining the ACC, they're 21-37. And you really have to believe this, that being part of the same conference as Florida State, I got to be honest with you, it's got to have hurt their recruiting. I think when they were alone and being part of the Big East and kind of having not only that intrastate rivalry with the Gators and the Seminoles, but also the conference rivalry of Big East versus ACC, I really believe it's had to help them in terms of recruiting. They've been nothing. They got off to a pretty good start with Larry Coker and all the rest of it, but they've been nothing since then. They've been through tumultuous times, and teams that they thought were going to do better have just been terrible. Rutgers. I'll probably finish with Rutgers because I'm not going to go through the whole litany of teams here and how they've fared against, top 25 powers. But Rutgers, while they were in the Big East, they were 4-40-1. They do leave and join that AAC before they joined the Big East, before they joined the Big Ten. They were 0-3 in the AAC against ranked opponents. They have not defeated one ranked opponent in the Big Ten while a member of the Big Ten. In fact, it's really been, let's say, for the last, 60 years. And I know that Wisconsin and every once in a while Michigan State have been in there and stuff, but it's really been Michigan, Ohio State dominating the Big Ten. And that's another thing. You're going against traditional powers. I really believe that these programs would have been better off and probably getting their own contract. And it probably would have been something good. I'm sorry, there's always room. And how do I know there's always room and there's always more money? Take a look at what Texas and Oklahoma are about to do. They're joining the Southeast Conference. And I really believe this, and I've said this in past shows, as these schools, and there's nothing set in stone, 2 or 3 years from now, I might be talking about a new Big East conference coming to be, that these schools said, you know what, the heck with joining the ACC, let's go back. Rutgers saying, we're getting thumped around too much in the Big Ten, let's just go back. And maybe we can make a big time deal with all the streaming online and all the rest of it. But I really believe that you're going to see in the next 4 or 5 years, some of these teams finally committing and saying, all right, we're just going to become a football type school, and we're just going to kind of just join up with the SEC, and some of these other schools might be left behind. And I really believe this, that had the Big East just stayed intact, they would be a big player today. I really do believe that. they would be a big player today, simply because they have the money around them, they have the media, and they have the population. Even though many people are moving south, still, you're talking about New Jersey and New York with about 20, 25 million people, at least, in the tri-state area with UConn and all the rest of it. So, and that was another team I left out. UConn, while they were in the Big East, went to the Fiesta Bowl. Now they're just trying to hang on. They had to go to the waning seconds to beat Yale yesterday. All right, and finally get off the snide of losing. I think they lost 19 in a row or something like that. So, really, when I was doing the stats, Virginia Tech, my last one, do you realize that when they were in the Big East, and this is all a tribute to Frank Beamer, they had 5 times they won 10 or more games. They go to the ACC, yes, all because of Beamer. They have 9 times where they won 10 or more games. But while they were in the Big East, they played for the national title. They haven't really been any kind of player since then in the ACC. And I really believe this. Playing every year, Virginia, again, I'm almost equating it this way. Conference rivalry, in-state rivalry. I really believe this, that there are, it makes for much more fascination and a better narrative when you have teams in the state playing in separate conferences instead of within the same conference. Now you can say, well, what about North Carolina, NC State, Duke, and Wake Forest? I get it. These are conferences that kind of evolved, or these are memberships that kind of evolved 50 years ago that were more regional. I mean, you had 4 teams in the ACC from the state of North Carolina. Yes. You could actually argue where they helped or hurt by staying in the same league. That would be something interesting as well. But I really believe this. With these particular schools, had they just stayed in the Big East and just kept the Big East intact, I really think that their football programs would be better off. They haven't improved while in the ACC. They have not improved. And yes, as I stated, probably their bank accounts are much richer and fuller, but their programs are not. If anything, they've been hurt by joining up with these other programs. Okay, that's my take on the Big East, or the desertion of the Big East. I'd like to mention this. As I transition, I'm doing it well. Don't know why it's in black and white, but I will tell you this. This week we lost Ray Fosse, and he's always been an interesting person to me because he kind of represents this. Well, first of all, I want to just say this. Fosse started his career with the Cleveland Indians in 67. He had 67 and 68. He had a cup of coffee with both teams. They probably were finally going to entrust him with the catching duties after the 69 season when he played 37 games. In 1970, his first full year with the Indians, he had 18 homers and 61 RBIs. But that is not really a fair statistical breakdown because after the All-Star game, Fosse will admit that he couldn't lift his shoulder because it was damaged in that collision with Pete Rose. Couldn't lift his shoulder or his arm above his shoulder, had struggled. Now he's catching games and all the rest of it, and he's trying to hit with a separated shoulder. And I'm sure there was more damage to that shoulder. Unfortunately for Fosse, he does make one more All-Star game the final year. Has a pretty good season, but never the same as 1970. In 70, like I said, he was 18 and 61, hit 307. In 1971, he had 12 homers, 62 RBIs, and hit 276. But then his career really went downhill. Only one other year where he hit double digits in home runs, and that was 1972. He only played 134 games. And then in 73, he plays for the Oakland A's after being traded, played 143 games. Now, this is where it's interesting, and it's a big if. And of course, the Ray Fosse cards I'm showing you this is the 1970, and this is the Kellogg's one, which I love. Sorry they're not in color. These are great though in color. I do like those 2 cards of his, and we'll get to Scipio Spinks in a second. But here's what I always like. These are the big ifs. Do you think Ray Fosse would have taken a Hall of Fame career like an Ernie Banks and, had a pretty good career? Maybe Baseball Reference has him basically over his career. This would be his line: 11 homers, 57 RBIs. If he were able to do that in 12 games, he would have finished with over 120 homers. He would have finished with probably 700 RBIs, would have hit, and would have had probably about 1,300, probably 1,500 hits. Anyway, playing maybe his whole career with the Cleveland Indians. Hall of Fame, I'll give you that. Do you think he would have taken that over being injured, never being the same player as he once was, but getting traded? And again, you got to give Finley credit for this. Getting traded to the A's and playing on the 73 and 74 championship teams, World Series winners, and then playing on the division winner with the Oakland A's. And then after his career is over, becoming a baseball announcer for the same Oakland A's. Wonder what you would have taken, because it is fascinating. Would he have ever given back his 2 rings for a Hall of Fame career? I always ask that because it is kind of interesting. Many people would say, "Oh no, give me the Hall of Fame and I don't need the World Series rings." But really, isn't that why we play? All right. Fosse was actually that collision. People don't realize this. Supposedly the night before, Rose and Fosse had dinner together. It seemed like they were becoming fast friends. The funny thing is, and the irony of all this, is that Rose was excoriated for his run home and the collision at home and the injury that he did to Ray Fosse. He's excoriated for that. But here's the interesting thing. The same people I always felt that admonished Pete Rose were the same ones that said, we got to fix the All-Star game and give the winning side home field advantage in the World Series. So in a sense, making a game that was staged kind of like a celebrity type of softball event, but even better than that, kind of like where everyone gets to see your stars of the game in one stadium and making it a showcase of those players. Instead of doing that, they wanted to put an importance on the game. And here is Rose, and you have to remember in context of the time, Rose, when he collided with Ray Fosse, there was some animus. There was definitely a rivalry between the American League and the National League. Remember, the National League hadn't lost in quite a bit of time. And in fact, Brooks Robinson will tell you that when they finally won the All-Star game in 71, he was so happy because I think he was on the losing side 18 times in his career. And so there was a bit of animus, a bit of rivalry. There was one league wanting to outshine the other. On that play, Rose, if you take a look, Rose was kind of caught because he said, if I had slid, I might have gotten hurt. And so he decided to go, barreling in. Rose doesn't get hurt. Of course, Fosse gets a separated shoulder and probably even more tendon damage, ligament damage, and all the rest of it in his chest and his shoulder. But that was the stakes at the time in context. Today, yes, Rose or just wouldn't, the All-Star game just isn't taken with the same seriousness as it was back in the 70s. So I always thought Rose, and I am, let's face it, I was a Cincinnati Red fan. Rose, I think, gets kind of unfair criticism. He was doing what he had to do, and he always has said, if I had thought about getting hurt, I would have gotten hurt. And that's why he didn't slide, because he thought he was going to get hurt. So he goes in, boom, bang, bang, bang at the home plate. Fosse, though, of course, this is kind of like life rewarding him in a respect. Yes, gets hurt, an injury that really does affect him in terms of his career, but does get traded where he becomes a valuable player for the Oakland A's. Maybe not a starter, never an all-star again, but certainly a big cog, an important piece on those championship teams of 73 and 74 for the Oakland A's. And he's got 2 rings for that. Interesting. It's just an interesting debate. Would you have taken the World Series rings, or would you have taken a Hall of Fame career? The next guy I wanted to talk about, and this is the irony of it all. Scipio Spinks, I remember, he kind of reminded me, and I do remember the day he got hurt. I didn't realize it was July 4th, but I do remember he got hurt at a collision at home plate. And I just remember that Scipio Spinks, I think I had gotten his baseball card that year or whatever. And he was real fast. And this was the time when sometimes they used pitchers to run the bases for the big lumbering players. Like you'd rather have Spinks run than, let's say, Joe Torre on the St. Louis Cardinals, or Lee May on the Houston Astros, or Frank Howard on the Washington Senators. Anyway, Scipio Spinks, I didn't realize this. I was looking him up today. He was 3rd in the league in ERA at that time in 1972, behind Tom Seaver, and I think I'm going to say like Bob Gibson or something. I think it was 72. And obviously it was Steve Carlton who would wind up winning the Cy Young Award. So maybe it was Carlton, Seaver, and then Spinks. Spinks had a pretty decent ERA, 2.67. He was 5-5 that year with the St. Louis Cardinals, 2.67 ERA. He slides home, and ironically, with catcher Johnny Bench, he has a collision at home with Bench, messed up his knee. I always thought he broke his ankle, but the article I was reading, I think I got it from Wikipedia, stated that he does do damage to his leg. I always thought he broke his leg, but it was his knee and the ligaments in his knee. And he does return from the injury. He played one more season with St. Louis in 93 and goes 1-5 with a 4.89 ERA. But he's really never the same. And that happened to be his last year in the major leagues. Good thing for Scipio Spinks is that he does work in the front office of a couple of baseball teams. I think of the Astros, maybe even as a scout. But he was another guy at home plate. His career ended prematurely. Do I think he was a Hall of Fame pitcher? I don't know. But I definitely think this. He did have a good array of pitches. He was with a good team, the St. Louis Cardinals. So he was probably under the tutelage of, let's say, a Bob Gibson. Probably was on his way, even though he's 5-5 in 16 games. Probably would have won 15 games for the St. Louis Cardinals in 1972. Probably would have been like a 15 to 17 game winner. Probably would have surprised people because he was kind of on the framework or of the body build as a Pedro Martinez, but that's not a bad guy to be compared with. And so maybe he didn't have the talent of Pedro, but he was definitely, you're talking about a guy who could win from 15 to 20 games a year, maybe do that 3 or 4 times in his career, and really be a valuable pitcher on any starting staff in the major leagues, especially St. Louis. The last guy I want to focus on is this, probably the most heartbreaking. And that is, of course, Tony Conigliaro. Now, I was just real young, just getting into baseball at the time. And I just want to save the other page. It is going to be. Here's Tony C's, I think this is 1965. He does lead the league in home runs, Tony Conigliaro. And, of course, most baseball fans will know that he led the league in home runs in 1965. actually finished in the top 33 in the MVP in 1965, as he had 32 homers, 82 RBIs, and a 269 batting average, and drew 50 walks. Not bad. Makes the All-Star team in 1967 with 20 homers and 67 RBIs. And that is where things kind of turn against him. Because during the impossible dream season of the Boston Red Sox in 1967, and maybe you could probably argue this, had Tony C been there for the full season, maybe the Red Sox do win the pennant, not just the pennant, but win the World Series. Maybe he's that one bat that obviously that they were missing in the lineup, because he had shown he could drive in runs, driving in 93 and 66 with 93. He had some power, had a little bit of speed, but on August 18th, he's hit by a pitch by Jack Hamilton of the California Angels. Now, this was and I know it might bother some people, this was the picture of Tony C after getting hit, and you can see the damage. Did break a bone in his face and obviously damaged the retina in his eye. Incredibly, Tony C does come back from that injury. He actually played 3 more years, 69, 70, and 71. He's traded, ironically, to the California Angels, and then comes back to the Red Sox in 75. So he's out 4 years and comes back in. He actually, in 1970, with the Red Sox, hit 36 home runs, his career high, 116 RBIs, career high, and hits 266. And has an incredible year in 1970. But the damage that was inflicted on his eye in 1967 leads to, I believe, eventual blindness. And obviously his career is ended from that pitch. Now, Jack Hamilton, I know it had to have an effect on his career, because in that game, he lost to the Red Sox in Fenway Park. He was 8-2. He pitched 5 innings in that game that he hit Conigliaro. He was 8-3. He finished the season 9-6 in 1967. He goes on to win only 3 more games and lose 11. His career is done by 1969. And I am convinced that he probably was affected by hitting Tony C. 3 players who were injured on the playing field, careers definitely altered. 1 permanently altered. 1, you could argue, maybe turned out to be a good thing with 2 championship rings and an announcing gig after his playing days. This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History, thanking you again for joining me. I'll be back here with another edition